One of the questions that I had is, what do you think, is it important for the commission to have a specific target, something that they're tasked to accomplish with their recommendations? And what do you think might be a good target for them?
Yes, I do believe that Congress should give the commission a very clear, attainable, and specific target. But beyond that, members of Congress should leave it up to the commissioners to determine how to achieve that target. For example, in the past, we've seen legislative text where one party or the other would try to constrain the commissioners by saying, for example, you may only consider spending reductions, but no revenue increases, or the opposite. And that I think is a recipe for failure. I don't think that would even pass. But a clear and attainable target, I think, would be to stabilize the debt at a certain percentage of GDP. And I think it is very much attainable to stabilize debt at 100% of GDP over the next 10 years. But I think that is insufficient for several reasons. I think a better target would be to stabilize debt below 80% of GDP over the next 30 years, because many of the changes that the commissioners might consider to Social Security and Medicare, including changes to the eligibility ages for these programs, changes to how benefits will be calculated in the future. There will be a phase-in period. I think that we can all acknowledge that if people have been promised a certain health and retirement benefits, and then you change them substantial ways where they don't really have time to adapt to those changes, that is much more harmful than necessary, especially if you act earlier rather than later. And to avoid such sudden deep changes in what benefit levels people can expect, I think the commissioners would likely consider those implications and trying to adopt the approach of doing less harm. And that could mean that many of those changes would phase in over a period of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, where if you have a goal of stabilizing the debt at 100% of GDP over 10 years, you are not looking beyond that horizon. And so you're missing some of the most important changes that need to be made. So a 30-year horizon is better than a 10-year horizon. The reason I picked 80% of GDP for long-term debt sustainability is that my colleague Jack Salmon did a very good literature review of where at what threshold levels debt starts significantly impacting economic growth negatively. And for industrialized countries, of course, it differs by country and economic conditions, but it's roughly 80% of GDP debt starts to drag down growth. So we should aim to stay below that target. I've also been following other proposals like the Trust Act, and I think the goal of long-term solvency for Medicare and Social Security, and in the case of the Trust Act, also the Highway Trust Fund, is also a very good approach. So perhaps the first goal that the commissioner should achieve is stabilizing debt at below 80% of GDP over 30 years, adopting that long-term target. And for changes to Medicare and Social Security, I think it would be wise to adopt a target of long-term solvency. And those two targets of stabilizing debt as a percentage of GDP and attaining long-term solvency for Medicare and Social Security will have to go hand in hand and can be accomplished together.